Hey guys, it's Jeff. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov. This is a science fiction novel that was released in 1972, and it is 293 pages long. I found out about this book from reading Parallel Worlds by Michio Kaku. I also have done a review on this book, which I will include the reviews for those books in the description below. So far, two books on this channel have come from reading this one. Tau Zero, I'll include the review for that book below as well, and The Gods Themselves so far. So this is really only the second science fiction book that I've come across and picked up and read, and now we're doing reviews on it. Just as a heads up, stick around after the review once I score it, so that you can hear some spoilers and some in-depth pointers as to why I scored the book that it did. I don't want to do spoilers just for spoilers' sake, but mainly to give a more detailed explanation of why I scored the book the way that I did, rather than just spoiling things just for spoilers' sake. Because sometimes when I read a book and there's something I didn't like about it, it might be a spoiler for the story, and I don't want to give that away. So if you haven't read the book, you can stick around if you want to, or if you have read the book, stick around to hear my reasonings behind it. So what this book is about is Earth has come in contact with a parallel universe. And they are able to freely exchange materials between both universes. So the character that it follows in the first section of the book is Dr. Halam, who is a scientist at a university, and he comes in one day into his office and he sees like a material just sitting on his desk, and thinking that it's some kind of joke or prank or whatever made by one of his students or one of his colleagues. He takes this material because it looks a little foreign, it looks a little different to him, under a microscope, and finds out that that it is called plutonium-186. Now, in our universe, that number, the 186 number, belongs to tungsten. I don't know if it's, me personally, I don't know if it's like atomic number or whatever, but that 186 number belongs to tungsten in our universe, but the material is actually plutonium. So upon further inspection, he finds out that that in our universe, tungsten is stable, but this plutonium-186 is not stable. And over time, the more that they let it sit there, the more that it decays and becomes radioactive and is giving off energy. So, through some deduction, he concludes that it must have come from a different universe for some reason, where plutonium-186 is stable in their universe, but unstable in ours. So this happens a few more times where they send over this material, and eventually that other universe sends over instructions on how to build their end of the electron pump, as it becomes to be known. The humans can build their end of the electron pump so that humans can send over tungsten-186 and basically do the same thing for that parallel universe. So these paramen create this pump where they send over plutonium-186. It radiates, gives off energy, giving limitless energy to humans. And then in exchange, we put tungsten-186 in the machine. It sends it over to them, and they can benefit from the decay of that material so that they can get their, limitless free energy. So there's exchange between two universes. And they're basically exposing, or I don't know if that's the right word, exposing the natural laws of each universe and taking advantage of them. So at first it seems like a great idea because you're basically getting free energy, but very quickly certain scientists around Dr. Hallam, namely Peter Lamont, who is a younger student who wants to learn about the history of the pump and how it was created and how everything works, makes some measurements that the pump is actually more dangerous than beneficial. It's beneficial in the short period, but as you get more material from the other universe, all of that extra material is basically stuck in our universe and is affecting our laws of physics. Okay. He finds out that when all of these extra electrons are being radiated off of the plutonium-186, that's a bunch of extra electrons that never existed in our universe before. So now we're adding all these extra, electrons are extremely small, but when you keep doing it over 20, 30 years, 40 years, lifetimes, eventually all of these extra electrons are going to affect with our laws of physics and start to cause problems for us. And the main one being that the other universe has a strong nuclear force, which basically holds, everything together. Their stronger nuclear force will cause our star to die prematurely, die earlier than it was supposed to. So we've got, in the book, it's about the year, they don't give a specific year, but they say the 22nd century. So at least 2100. So some maybe like 100 years in the future, they've discovered this, and they're not exactly sure, or Lamont is not exactly sure how long it'll take for this pump to actually kill our star, because he's still young and doesn't have the exact resources that Hallam has. Because this discovery by Hallam puts him on a trajectory that makes him famous and gives him like a Nobel Prize, and now he's world renowned because he discovered the pump, even though the aliens sent over their instructions in order for the humans to build it. Hallam basically just followed the instructions and put it together. But for everybody who isn't a scientist, everybody else around the world, in their eyes, he created the pump, so it doesn't really make a difference to them. Lamont knows the truth. Some other associates of Hallam's know the truth. Another scientist named Ben Dennison, who is basically has his office right across the hall from Hallam. Both Dennison and Lamont's careers get destroyed basically before they really took off, because Lamont and Dennison wanted to stop the pump before it became even more dangerous than it already was. But since this pump has given Hallam, rich and fame, he does, jealously, he doesn't want to give up this invention that he came across. And Lamont basically said, well, it must have come from a higher intelligence than us, because we're the ones that just put it together. They sent through all the instructions. They're the ones that created it. They must have been a higher intelligence. So in order to create this and send us instructions, and Hallam doesn't like that. So he basically kills Lamont's career and Dennison's before it even starts. So I wanted to read, this is on page 17 and 18, the exchange of how, it's just a couple paragraphs of how the matter gets exchanged between the universes, because that's one thing that I really did like about this book. And like Tau Zero was the other science fiction novel that I read. These are the only two that I've read so far. So I don't know if this is common for like science fiction. I would hope so, because this is awesome. But rather than, when I picture science fiction, futuristic, flying cars, and I'm sure you have the same image, but they actually go and explain the science behind what's actually happening with these elements and the consequences of having different laws of physics leak into your own universe. So that was a plus for this book, because it was really interesting to read how Asimov showed how this exchange happens, and actually went along with the consequences of it, rather than being like, yeah, these two universes are exchanging matter and that's it. It shows that, well, if you exchange matter, you can't really have everything be nice and tidy, because that's unnatural in that universe. And eventually these universes are going to reach an equilibrium where, like, rather, like, this universe has this laws of physics, this universe has this laws of physics, and eventually they're going to reach a state where they both have the same types of laws of physics. So that other universe has a stronger nuclear force, which means that their stars don't last as long as ours. They're much smaller, and since they don't last as long and they're stronger, when that leaks over into our universe, it kills our stars faster. So this is on page 17 and 18. Plutonium-186, stable in their universe, contains far too many protons or too few neutrons to be stable in ours with its less effective nuclear interaction. The plutonium-186, once in our universe, begins to radiate positrons, releasing energy as it does so, and with each positron emitted, a proton within a nucleus is converted to a neutron. Eventually, 20 protons per nucleus have been converted to neutrons, and plutonium-186 has become tungsten-186, which is stable by the laws of our own universe. In the process, 20 positrons per nucleus have been eliminated. These meet, combine with, and annihilate 20 electrons, releasing further energy, so that for every plutonium-186 nucleus sent to us, our universe ends up with 20 fewer electrons. Meanwhile, the tungsten-186 that enters the para-universe is unstable there for the opposite reason. By the laws of the para-universe, it has too many neutrons or too few protons. The tungsten-186 nuclei begin to emit electrons, releasing energy steadily while doing so, and with each emitted electron, a neutron changes to a proton until, in the end, it is plutonium-186 again. With each tungsten-186 nucleus sent into the para-universe, 20 more electrons are added to it. So with that being said, it's basically, whatever universe you're in, and when it decays down into the normal element of what it should have been, there's all these extra subatomic particles floating around now after it decayed that will, affect your laws of physics. So that's basically the book is divided into 3 parts. That's part 1. And it ends with a frustrated Lamont, basically angry that nobody is taking him seriously because he's trying to save humanity before the sun explodes or, gets, turns into a giant, red, I don't even know all this. I don't know the terms, but before it changes its structure to the point where it kills Earth and everybody on it, it ends with him being frustrated that nobody is taking him seriously because they're more concerned about right now where there's free limitless energy. So part 2 follows the paramen, as they call them, the para-universe, parallel men, and their intentions with the pump. So, as stated before, the universe has a much stronger strong nuclear force than ours, which makes their stars a lot smaller and they don't last as long. That strong nuclear force is responsible for holding matter together. Their sun is dying and they need this exchange of energy between the universes in order to survive. We weren't really in any danger. We're just benefiting from the energy. But for them, they're benefiting from the energy in order to save the planet that they live on. They're very unique because they're not solid like we are. Their chemical makeup They refer to themselves as soft ones, and their elders or their teachers, scientists, are called hard ones, which are solid like us. So there's kind of two different types of species that are on this planet that they live on. The soft ones, if you can picture an amoeba where it's all, wiggly and kind of goopy looking, is how I picture it. Where they don't have like solid defined features as we do. They're kind of almost like a Play-Doh, where they can kind of move around, and their edges are soft, and they can kind of shape their edges how they want to. And although they pride themselves in being able to solidify themselves as they grow mature and grow older, they take pride in being able to like solidify themselves, and generally being all loosey goosey and being able to being just like a big blob is almost like embarrassing to them in their culture. Even though they are not completely solid, the more solid that they portray themselves as is like a sign of maturity. Since their sun is dying, they need all this extra energy from this universe. They feed off sunlight, similar to photosynthesis. So when they're hungry, they don't actually have food that they eat. They go outside, they bask in the sun, and they get their energy that way. That sunlight gets transformed into food the same way a plant does. The soft ones are very unique because not only are they male and female, but they create a triad, as they call it. So in our, humans, we have male and female, and we need male and female to, conceive a child. For them, they have male and female, but they also have they're like societal roles, but each of those societal roles is essential to conceiving another triad, basically. So the three different types of there's the three different types of roles that they have are a left, a middle, and a right side of the triad. So rationals are the left side, and they're male, and they're considered, scientists, the thinkers, basically like the working force of the triad. They provide the seed for mating, which they call melting. Emotionals are the middle, they're female, and they provide the energy needed in order to conceive. So without the emotional in the middle providing all that extra energy to conceive the child, it just wouldn't work. Parentals are the right side of the triad. They're male, and guessing by the name parentals, they are tasked with raising the child and are kind of like the homemakers of the triad. And they have a total focus on only the children. That's really the only thing that they're concerned about. And that goes true with the other two sides of the triad, where the rationals are really only concerned with doing science and working and advancing the race, and same for the emotionals. The story follows Odin, which is the left, who is the left rational, Dua, who is the mid emotional, and Trit, who is the right parental. The hard ones are the elders and like the wisest of the population. They're the teachers, and they guide the triads into their roles and kind of assist them in becoming who they're supposed to be. So this species of alien is very focused on saving their species rightfully, but at the expense of Earth. So when they create this electron pump, they're not worried about whether it's going to harm the other universe. They know it's going to harm us, but they're more concerned about saving their species rather than destroying some other species in a different universe that they're never going to meet. that they have some interaction with, but in the long run, doesn't really matter whether they die because they would rather save their own species. They know that their strong nuclear force is stronger than ours, and they rely on that because they want us to keep accepting their plutonium-186 in hopes that it will kill our star, blow it up, and that sudden rush of energy from our star becoming a quasar, they are banking on that sudden rush of energy in order to save their species. Which I'm not exactly, this was one of the problems I had. I wasn't exactly sure whether, like, if they killed our star and that sudden influx of energy happened, if it destroyed Earth, like, instantly, then our side of the electron pump wouldn't exist anymore, and they couldn't freely exchange, and they couldn't get that energy anymore. So I'm wondering if they were just, crossing their fingers, hoping that the sun would not destroy us in time, so that that sudden influx of energy, they could, once it came through their side of the pump, like, they could, like, store it somewhere so that they can just tap into it, store all that energy somewhere and then tap into it whenever they needed to. I don't know. Because, if Earth was destroyed, they mentioned several times that the pump doesn't work unless there's two sides of it. Like, you can send stuff over, but in order to receive energy from the other side, you need someone on the other side controlling, that or monitoring that free exchange of energy over there. So if it destroyed Earth, or if it destroyed the sun and then the sun destroyed our Earth, the only way that makes sense to me of how they can save themselves is if they were able to store that energy extremely quickly and power because it says that they wanted to power that energy would power their species for 1,000,000 lifetimes. So not even 1,000,000 years, but 1,000,000 lifetimes. So they're banking on this sudden influx of energy to save their species. Now, while most of the species is on board with that, Dua, who is the middle emotional, really seems to be the only one that actually has a problem with it. Like Odin, who's the left rational, seems to have some regret about killing an entire species in order to save theirs, but it trumps his rational thinking of trying to save us, outweighs that, and he says, well, I kind of feel bad, but our survival matters more than theirs, so I'm okay with them dying. Dua is really the only one that has a problem with killing Earth and the sun and humans in order to save their species. So she's really the only one on that side of the story in part 2, attempting to figure out how to stop this electron pump for, to basically to save us. And it's unusual, and the entire story is it's unusual for her to act that way, because normally rationals are the ones that get interested in science and how everything works. But Dua was born unusual, and she gets made fun of often for that, where they often call her a left emotional, where emotionals are in the middle of the triad. They call her a left emotional, which basically means that you're an emotional, but you think like a rational. And that's kind of, like derogatory term for her, even though she doesn't see a problem with thinking differently. Everybody else is set in their own ways and their own like gender roles that they've got. And she's, she goes along with that for a time, but she doesn't really see a problem with wanting to think differently than everybody else. Um, Now, section 2, I was like 90% interested in it. I liked part 1 the most out of, there's 3 parts in the book. I liked part 1 the most. Section 2 with the para universe was like 90% interesting to me. I wrote in my notes, I often, or not often, but I sometimes found that I was like, my eyes were kind of glazing over, and I was kind of like, I kind of want this section to end. You know, there were a couple spots where it was just a little, I was just kind of sitting there like, okay, let's get on with the story. Because the book is like 293, but I'll just round up for 300 for, just for even sake. Part 1 is like maybe like 80 pages, which is really short. And I think like this middle section was the longest of the 3. And I kind of wish section 1, where they were discovering the pump and like the human side of things, were, I kind of enjoyed that one the most. And in hindsight, I kind of wish that part 2 wasn't written, not because it wasn't interesting, but in part 1, when I was wondering who these aliens could be, that was exciting for me because it was mysterious, and we don't know what these aliens' intentions were. And trying to just kind of like piece that together, to me, was very satisfying, rather than Asimov saying, here is what these aliens are, and here's what their intentions are. Because in part 3, which I'm about to get to, it brings it back to the human side of things, another like 20, 30 years in the future, after the pump has been around for some time. The humans kind of deduce that by themselves, where it's like, all right, well, like, it's benefiting us with energy, but what if their intentions were sinister? What if they were fully aware of their strong nuclear force leaking into our universe and causing us problems? So you didn't really need like a section 2 to go over and explain that their intentions were cruel. I don't think that was the intention of part 2, to show that they were cruel, but to show the other universe. And I'm glad it was written, because it's a really cool whole other universe that you have to create with different laws of physics, and you have to create a whole society. And Asimov did do a great job with that. Now there was a few times during section 2 where, it follows mainly Dua, Trit, and Odin. Odin's triad. They call it Odin's triad because I think they identify it as whoever the rational is, like his triad. It follows mainly them, although whereas section 1 followed the scientists who are discovering this pump and putting it together. And I was kind of throughout section 2, why is it following just a triad? Why is it following this triad when they really don't have much to do with the pump? Like it was mentioned that it was Odin's idea for the pump, but they weren't really the ones that developed it, worked on it, did all the science behind it. And one other thing that kind of threw me was how the Paramen came up with how they were able to identify another universe existing. Because in part 1, humans are, even though it's in the year at least 2100, they're basically in the same position that you and I are in right now, where it's, where we live in a technology world, but there was nothing really so far advanced until this electron pump came along, and they were confused as to, well, we're not as intelligent as these other aliens are. So how do we, how can we identify another universe? What type of science would go into that? So I wish I would have seen, like, rather than coming into the triad, um, or additionally into, coming into the triad's world where they've got the pump running for some time already, explain how they were able to be able to, like, locate another universe, what kind of science that would be, what kind of tools did they use to, like, measure, I don't know, energy or some kind of matter or something. They didn't really explain, like, how they came across figuring out another universe. And part 2 ends with a twist that I was actually very surprised by, that I will reveal after the review, that I did not see coming. Sometimes in books you can see, all right, there's some kind of, they're kind of hiding something, and maybe you could see a twist coming. This twist I actually didn't see at all. And it has to do with the way that the triads mate, because when they melt, as they call it, they basically orgasm for sometimes 2-3 days at a time, and they have no memory of what happens during that time period. And the more, the more ecstasy that's involved, the more successful, they call the melt, the more successful it is, and there's a better chance of conceiving another child. And kind of throughout the entire second section of the book, I kind of felt that the hard ones were keeping a secret from the soft ones, because they almost looked at the soft ones as, like lowly citizens, where they gave certain soft ones, like, privilege to be able to speak to them. But, it hurts when the soft ones touch them, because since their strong nuclear force is much stronger, soft ones are able to pass through solid objects. We're solid, so if I try to put my hand through my other hand, it's not going to work. But since their strong nuclear force is much stronger, their atoms don't have to be so close together. So if our atoms have to be like this when we're solid, the soft ones, their atoms could probably be, this far apart, and they still remain intact. So when your atoms are that far apart, you can pass through objects much, much easier. So throughout the second section of the book, I was kind of like, it seems like the hard ones are hiding something from the soft ones. I couldn't guess what it was. And at the end of the second section was pleasantly surprised and did not see that twist coming. So I'll explain that after the review. So part 3 seems like it was the shortest of the 3 parts. I don't really have much to say about this one. And this one I kind of liked the least. It takes place back in Earth's universe, some 20, 30 years in the future. Earth has colonized the moon, and it follows Denizen from section 1, who was Halam's associate with his office right across the hallway. He's visiting the moon because since his career was destroyed, he hasn't practiced, really anything sciencey since it happened. He goes to the moon because he just wants to get away from Earth. He's pretty much sick of everybody on there and wants a different experience. And also because he wants access to the electron pump and the machines, just the different, like, scientific labs and machines that they use, because he couldn't get his hands on it on Earth because of his, tattered reputation that Halam basically threw him under the bus. He wants to be able to access these scientific machines to do some tests to kind of prove to people that, yes, the pump is dangerous. So it follows Ben Denizen, and Selene, who is a native Lunarite, who was born on the moon, and a lot of the people that are on the moon were born there, and therefore have a different physical makeup than we do. They're still human, but since they live in much lower gravity, they have different muscle structure and they can bounce around. Since the gravity is like 1/6 of the gravity of Earth, they can jump around much easier. So, when Dennison comes to the moon, he has a hard time adjusting because he feels like he's bouncing all over the place because he's so used to Earth gravity and it's much lighter. And so, similarly, Selene could never go to Earth because the weight would basically crush her and she wouldn't, she's lived on the moon her entire life. So that difference in gravity, would wreak havoc on her system. And most of the people that live on the moon, sometimes they'll have like immigrants, they call them immies, where it's like a derogatory term for people who come from Earth and want to live on the moon. And there's like Earth tourists where they come to tour the moon and then they'll go back, and the people on the moon kind of look down upon the people on Earth, just because they know how greedy Earth people can be, and the Lunarites, they call themselves, just want to be left alone. They want to consider themselves their own society rather than being manipulated and like governed by Earth. They want to be considered their own entity. Now, Dennison, changes Selene's mind where, she has some respect, at least for him, because he's different than other Earth people. So the third section of the book basically has Dennison and Selene trying to figure out ways to get rid of the pump and or save our star from the damage that it's already been inflicted on it. So either trying to get rid of the pump or coming up with some alternative way to like counteract it so that it's not hurting us anymore. I'm not going to tell you right now whether Earth is saved or not. I'll save that afterwards. I don't want to ruin anything for you. So that's all 3 sections of the book. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It was a very, very well done. It wasn't perfect, and I'll go over some of those problems that I had. I didn't think it deserved a 5, based on some of the things I already said. Like when it's a great book, but as I mentioned before, my eyes glazed over at parts. It was a great idea for a story, and it also showed the consequences of what happens when you mix 2 universes together rather than, saying, yeah, we're both just going to benefit and that's it. It shows real life and actual science consequences of what would happen if 2 universes were mushed together. Another plus is that it's not easy to create an entire alien species from scratch and have it work so as well as it did, because it's very believable that not only does this race have male and female, but they also have certain roles. And in Dua's case, the shame that she feels at first when people are calling her a left emotional, and the embarrassment that Odin feels when Dua does something crazy, and the parental love that Trit has for his children and is almost willing to do anything to protect them and make sure that they have a fair life, was really well done. And, I enjoyed that part of it. So in my opinion, section 1 was the best for me because I liked following the Earth side of things more, and the mysteriousness of trying to figure out who these paramen were and what their intentions were was really interesting to me in section 1. And I also like to mention that it's award-winning. on the front of the book, it says the phenomenal grand master of science fiction, Asimov, his Hugo and Nebula award-winning classic, The Gods Themselves. So they kind of put it in between the title here. I'm not exactly sure what those awards are. Maybe I could have looked them up, but I'm not sure. Maybe you'll know what they are. But I noticed that they won awards the year and the year after these awards. He won those awards the year and the year after that it was published back in 1973. So it wasn't like it was sitting around for a while and then it won awards. It won awards pretty quickly, so it stuck out to people. Okay. So some of the problems that I had with it, I already mentioned how would the Paramen actually locate our universe? When in section 1, there's a part where both universes are attempting to communicate with each other rather than just sending the material over. They're attempting to communicate by like getting the other side to stop the pump. But obviously not only is there a language barrier, because like if you try to discover like, let's say like a dead language on Earth, it was still created by humans and there might be some reference as to how you can translate that language. The humans and these Paramen are attempting to communicate with each other when they don't even know what type of language each one of them talks. So if we were to say the word, fear, or if they were to send the word fear over, to them, fear might be like, yeah, this is great, like keep going. But to us, fear is like, all right, you guys need to stop. So if we're telling them, please stop, they might take that as, yeah, keep going. So they might, they might not stop. So there's not only a language barrier, but like a species barrier to the point where we don't have any type of like primer to show where the origin of that language came from. And one of the problems was, well, if you're able to, you're speaking with a species that is alive and that you're communicating with, why couldn't you like send pictures over, rather than using like written words? Like if you're translating like a dead language that you found like if you're digging somewhere and you came across these scrolls that you didn't understand how to speak it, you don't have direct contact with that group of people to be able to say, all right, what does this mean? And what does that mean? You have to take it as it is and translate it that way. Whereas now they're speaking to this alien race. Why couldn't you say like, send over a picture of a book and this says like, this is a book and this is a microphone, and include pictures with a word so that you can start with something like that rather than just trying to guess what each other is saying. It almost seemed a little too simple to me. So I mean, obviously I'm not like a language expert or anything like that, but it seems like if you're able to communicate with someone that's actually alive, you could do more than just use words, like use pictures too and examples, and just do more than just words to me. Another problem that I had is that since the book was split into 3 sections, I felt like that kind of ruined the flow of the story. It makes sense on paper to switch between different perspectives, but since part 1 is like 80 pages long, just when you're getting excited about these characters, now part 2 starts, and you have to learn a whole new set of characters with a completely different alien race, and then once you're invested in them, that ends, and now part 3 starts with a new Denizen is a repeat character, but with a new set of mainly all new characters like, like 4 out of 5 of them are new except for Denizen. So it was like this choppy story that cutting it into 3 sections kind of was a little jarring story wise, which brings me back to the point of like, well, if part 2 had never been written, with the aliens, then you could still focus on like the Earth side throughout the entire story, and it wouldn't be so jumpy that way. Yeah, so that is everything that I have to say about the review. And just as a reminder, I gave it a 4 out of 5. I'll let you. I'm going to do a little slight spoilers now, just to give a little bit more detail as to why I scored it the way that I did. So if you want to stick around for that, I'll wait a couple seconds so that you can pause the video or continue watching, but give you a second to pause the video if you don't want to have anything spoiled for you. All right, so spoiler time. What I didn't expect to happen, which is kind of the part of the pleasant surprise at the end of the like the cliffhanger suspensefulness of section 2, is that hard ones are actually the fully mature form of soft ones. So when the triad melts and they all become, like one, like one blob of triad, and they lose their memory, they are briefly becoming a hard one, going about their business, and then when that melting ends, they split apart from a hard one and they become a triad again. So eventually the triad needs to pass on, as they call it. They need to pass on so to give room to this new like generation of triads that are coming about. So when they pass on, they will fully form into a hard one and leave their triad body behind. And this hard one creates this new like personality where it's all 3 personalities, combined into one. And the shocking part came that I didn't see coming was the hard one that Odin, Dua, and Trit create is Estwald, which is a scientist that is referenced periodically throughout section 2, and I didn't bring it up for certain purposes because I didn't want to try to reveal too much in the early review. But they become Estwald, and Estwald is the creator of the electron pump. So every time that Odin, Trit, and Dua melt together and they lose their memory, they turn into Estwald, which is basically the leader of the hard ones now, because he's the one that thought of the electron pump to happen. So it's kind of funny to see that Dua is so against creating this pump and she's trying to stop the hard ones, when in fact, when they melt together, she becomes part of the hard one that created the pump. And I'm assuming that since Trit and Odin, there 2 of them versus 1 of her, that their personalities, I guess, like overrule hers, because the majority of the personality is for keeping this pump going, and hers kind of gets overshadowed. So that's what I'm assuming that's what happens there. But I expected more from when the triad turned into Estwald, because when part 2 ended on a suspenseful like cliffhanger, Estwald was never revisited. Like the end of the section shows them turning into Estwald, and then he basically says, "Well, we've got some work to do." So it kind of lets this suspenseful, like, "Oh my God, I think this is a crazy, crazy twist in the story where, we think that maybe Dua is actually going to stop this pump from being created or to continue." Instead of her stopping that, like maybe these aliens are actually going to succeed, but it never gets revisited. So it's like, it's left on this like all right, I think they're going to be, successful in destroying Earth, but you never hear about Estwald or the aliens again. It's kind of just, I was kind of like, that was a great cliffhanger, but it never gets revisited. Um, uh, so yeah, and the sinister cliffhanger of part two, made me think that Estwald was going to succeed in destroying Earth, and I kind of had a slight desire to see the book end that way, because that would have been, we don't really see a lot of the side effects actually throughout the book. We don't really see a lot of the side effects of the pump interacting with our universe. Like they mention what the side effects are going to be, but at that point, if the sun explodes, well, it's too late, and now we've got, like, I don't know, no story left or something. Whereas I think it would have been cool to see, like, if our strong nuclear force, if their strong nuclear force was leaking into ours, that, if it would, like, say, if I put this book down on the table, then it would pass right through the table, or like people are walking and then all of a sudden they sink into the ground or something, because their atoms are being manipulated with that strong nuclear force, similar to how the strong nuclear force works with the triads in that universe, where they can pass through objects. I think it would have been cool to see our chemical makeup start to get affected, to where like maybe like a percentage of the population isn't completely solid anymore, and they start, like falling through the ground, and then they become solid again, and then they become stuck, or something, just like weird things like that. Like we never really see any consequences of these two universes merging together. Although they're talked about often, we don't actually get to see them firsthand. And so Earth gets saved by Selene and Denizen. They don't destroy the pump, and they're not able to stop it, but what they do is they create another pump that basically counteracts the electron pump. So they're able to find baby universes where pre-Big Bang, all matter, almost like a singularity, pre-Big Bang, all matter and energy are all in one cosmic egg, as they call it. So they call those universes the cosmeg universes. And because they deduced, well, if there's one other universe that exists with a different laws of physics, then there must be an infinite number. So they go through their scientific tests to try to figure out how many might exist, and if we can tap into those with, laws that could be similar to ours, or that could counteract the pump, so that, the pump's giving us all these extra electrons. Now we've got this cosmic egg universe that's giving us all these, like it's giving us more electrons, and then this pump will counteract that, so that eventually our universe will stay in its own equilibrium, in order to balance out the problems where we're not actually getting rid of both of them, but we're just maintaining a balance of both. So that these cosmic egg universes, once we grab enough material and energy out of them, then they will turn into a Big Bang and create a universe that could possibly hold life, maybe similar to ours. So they're not exactly sure, like, well, then if we can cause new universes to create, where did that first one come from? Where did that first Big Bang come from? They're not exactly sure about that, and they don't really go into that. It was just kind of like a side note. The only thing that I'm going to mention this, but I don't know, I can't go into detail on it, because I to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what it is. They mention that on that, like, the electron pump is on Earth, and on the moon they have something called, like, the energon synchrotron, or like positron synchrotron or something like that. Some kind of device like that. And there's also another device called the pionizer, which is almost like an extension of the pump, or does more like research to help the pump or something like that. And that was Denizen's main reason to coming to the moon in the first place, was because he wanted to get his hands on those machines just to like experiment and see how they worked. But to be honest with you, I was confused throughout the whole third section of what the purpose of those machines were, because the electron pump, passes material through, both universes. And I thought that was it. But then the introduction of these two new machines in the third section, I was just kind of like, I'm not exactly sure what the intention was for these two machines. So if you read the book, maybe you can tell me what it was. I didn't really bother to look it up because, to be honest, I didn't find it that important to like as like a central role. At least for me reading the book, it just kind of like went right over my head. So 4 out of 5, definitely pick this one up. I bought it at Barnes and Noble for like $8 or something like that. I mean, it's been around for 40 something years. So it's a classic, science fiction classic. You probably shouldn't have a hard time finding it. Definitely recommend it. This is the first Isaac Asimov book that I've read. I already have ideas to read the Foundation series, because I know that seems to be like his most popular series. So this one definitely will make me want to read more from him and more science fiction books in general. So thanks for watching. Leave a comment if you think that there's other science fiction books, like maybe by Asimov or other just in general, that you think I should read, and whether you agree or disagree with me on my scoring. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next review.